We're making these decisions for some specific reasons. We make every decision really with the long-term health of Xbox in mind. And what happens when an industry doesn't grow?
Microsoft cutting almost 2,000 jobs at Activision Blizzard.
But in no way were we alone in that.
Just this week, the video game streaming site Twitch announced 500 job cuts, and software company Unity said it's cutting 1,800, a quarter of its workforce.
And this ambition kind of also drove us to kind of try things that maybe we shouldn't try.
And so I think that just shows you that we got inefficient.
The workers, the people who are actually doing the day-to-day work of developing the games, they are laid off.
I might get the email saying like, no, we no longer need you.
Today's your last day, goodbye.
Not a stable industry wherever you go, whether it's AAA or even in indie spaces.
Boy, do we have a show for you.
Hello, thank you for tuning in. My name is Perry, and this is Played Off. It's an interview series with those affected by the layoffs in the video game industry. Joining me today, Shonté Daniels, a narrative designer / poet. Shonté, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
It's another beautiful day in paradise, so the saying goes. It's someone's paradise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about the layoffs, but before we dive into any of that, I want to talk about you. You have, in looking over your website, a really impressive resume. You have a master's in creative writing. You did a year as an English professor. You're a poet. You do freelance writing. You worked at Blizzard. It's really impressive. Yeah, you're welcome. Before any of that, why games? What got you into games?
It was my mother who got me into games when I was little. Like, I don't know. I was born and we already had a console because I have two older sisters. So I grew up with the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo, and I would watch my mom play Yoshi's Island, Contra 3, and at the time I was terrified, actually. I don't know why, but it's my child brain thought that like the enemies would come out of the screen and hurt me. So I would always cower behind her. I just have this fond memory of cowering behind my mother, who is sitting on the floor, and she's playing the first boss of Contra 3, which is like this metallic turtle monster, and it would extend its neck sometimes, and that just scared the shit out of me. And I don't know how old I was before I got over that, but like eventually I started playing the games and I loved them. I think even though those games had very little story, because my mom at the time was playing Contra and Punch Out and Mario, and so the stories weren't very complex. As I got older and stories, got deeper and I explored different genres of games, I just kind of realized, oh, this is wonderful. This is what I find in books, but with a controller. And I guess it was there that the same time that I was kind of learning about poetry in school was the same time I was playing video games, and I went, these are kind of the same. And that's how I started.
For sure. What were some of the influential narratives that you found in gaming that spoke to you?
Oh man, the first game that I remember thinking was like wonderful was The Illusion of Gaia for the Super Nintendo. I remember thinking this was better than Zelda. I thought, like, at the time, because everyone loved A Link to the Past, and I just couldn't get into it. But The Illusion of Gaia to me felt like a better Zelda. Now, as an adult, I love them both. I think they're great. But as a kid, that felt like you could only like one or the other. I was very much an Illusion of Gaia type of person. And it was so strange to me because the character's name was Will, which felt like such an ordinary name, and I thought, that's so weird. That's not like a fantasy name at all. That's just a normal kid. And he dives into these like portals that have Gaia, who's there to guide him, and he's going to these locations with his friends, and these dark things happen to his friends. Like he loses a friend who becomes a monster. 2 of his friends fall in love. It felt really strange and surreal in such a beautiful way that I'd never experienced that again, because my mother was playing, Punch Out and Mario. And so this was the first time that I saw, oh my gosh, like I couldn't believe a game could get so deep.
Right. Especially in that kind of like NES, SNES era where it's not like you don't have narratives, because there are ones that exist, but it's a little more sparse or quite not as impactful. There's a huge leap in narrative quality when looking at something like the Final Fantasy series, like going from the first 3, they're not anything horribly substantial, and then you see the evolution along with the technology associated with the medium.
Sometimes you're limited to what your parents buy. So I never played Final Fantasy until 10, Final Fantasy 10. So I missed a lot on stories that I could have experienced on the SNES. But because of the limited amount of games that we had, I was able to play Illusion of Gaia, and that really changed me. It's a game that I still try to play yearly because I just love it.
Those yearly revisits are always something special. So you played Final Fantasy X, so you get like a PS2, and assumably now, or maybe now, you're at a point where you're able to kind of keep up with landscape as different games, different opportunities to tell stories come out. What strikes you now as some of the better narratives you've seen out there or experienced?
Gosh, I always think back to FTL, Faster Than Light, as an example to me of modular storytelling, I guess. So, because it's a roguelike, and so the story changes depending on the route that you take and whether or not you live to reach the final boss or not. That to me was, I think, I don't know how old I was when I first played FTL. I might have been in college. FTL for me was also my first step, I think, into indie games. There was a point in college where I was just sick and tired of AAA titles. I just thought they're all the same, they're getting boring, they're doing the same stuff, and like I became, again, I guess I'm just such a person where I'm like, I love this, I hate this. I'm trying to be better about that. But I started to hate AAA titles, and I started to just adore the indie scene, because I thought things could be more experimental, things could be more poetic, things could be a little bit more wild. And so that's why I found FTL and Binding of Isaac.
Amazing.
Those were kind of, I know. Those were the two steps into the indie scene for me.
I've done, I think, way more hours than should ever be acceptable in the Binding of Isaac. That game has ruined me. I hear you, especially like even looking at last year's landscape of games that were coming out. And this is just my own personal opinion, but I think I got way more satisfaction out of something like Venba than probably 90% of the AAA games that came out.
Oh my gosh, yes. I love Venba. I love Sludge Life. I don't know if you've played Sludge Life 1 or 2.
I haven't. Describe it to me.
It's, so you are a graffiti artist. You're in this world. Sludge Life, the title is like so appropriate for this world. It's so, oh gosh, it's gross, but in like a beautiful way. It feels like everyone's smoking. There's shit in the toilets. Nothing is working, everything's broken, and you're just a graffiti artist that's trying to make art throughout this world and find spaces to put your tag. And I adore it. I love how weird it is. It's not at all like Venba, but I'm looking at my computer. I'm looking at my computer at my games that I've played recently, and Venba and Sludge Life 2 are right next to each other, which is why I brought it up.
I
love that.
I'm looking at the Steam page right now and just seeing the trailer. Yeah, it rocks. It something Umangi Generation.
Oh,
it looks
I have not played it, but
it gives slightly similar vibes. I mean, crazy different art styles, but the idea of just existing in a space, or you have just some odd primary goal. The trailer just showed me someone sitting on a toilet. Yeah, it's provocative, but almost in the endearing sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I'm trying to think of other games that I love. I had it on the tip of my tongue. Hypnospace Outlaw love Hypnospace Outlaw. That one's another one of like you're in a confined space, but it's very much like an AOL old forum type of setting where you're a cop for this old internet and you have to basically ban people for dumb reasons, but the story unfolds and you learn more about the space. I guess I love a confined space. I love when things feel confined to itself, because I think that's what I'm kind of diverting here, but that to me is what poetry is. If you think about poetry having like its own confined space, if we think of like a short poem, at least like a sonnet, it has its own rules, it has its own 14 lines, it doesn't have to be about love, but in this case we'll say it's about love, and you know, it has a volta, it has its rules. And I think that's what I love about poetry is you find those rules and then you go, okay, how can I break them? How can I make that break feel really effective and evocative and not like a breaking of a rule in a bad way? And I think that's what Sludge Life does for me and Hypnospace Outlaw and games that I'm attracted to. They know their rules, they know their space, and they do it so well that when they break their own rules, it's just like euphoric. It's just wonderful.
It's powerful. That was something in college my film professors drove into me, was like, you will get to a point where you are going to be breaking the rules and you will be doing it for emotional payoff and to have a great effect, but yeah, you gotta know the rules to break them. Have you checked out Emily is Away is a game that's coming to mind? I love those games. I've been obsessed with them. But like you said, you have a space that the game treats you to get familiar with, and that's the aim text box. And then in the last bit of the game, it breaks the rule that you're used to. You'll be typing into your keyboard, and your character who you've been associating with will automatically delete what you've been typing. Emergent gameplay, I don't think is the right term for it, but it's that establishment of rule and then breaking the rule to give that emotional payoff.
I love that.
Yeah.
it's a thing that I feel like only games can do, in a way, is like to give the player agency and then be, you know, then say like, never mind, or, you know, twist it a little bit, change it a little bit. It's just wonderful. It's just what makes games, I think.
Oh, yeah. Was working within games always the career path for you?
I guess not. I think I always wanted to be a writer. That was always set in stone for me. I didn't know you could be a game writer until like I was in college, when I started writing essays about games in school. In college, I had this English class that I didn't need to take. I had gotten all of my English credits, and I was just taking it for fun. And I gave myself the challenge of every essay I wrote had to be game related. Somewhere in there is when I realized, oh, I could be pitching these to, you know, game sites. They were not good essays, but they were fun to do. The only one I remember is the theme of the essay was about propaganda. Like, that was our assignment. We had to write something about propaganda. And so I tried to argue that achievements were a form of propaganda. I don't remember how I argued it at all, but I just remember I just tried to say like the games are the achievements, like they pop up in a way that's like makes you feel good and makes you want to keep playing and it makes you think the game is good. I don't know. I don't know.
No, it's a serotonin boost. You can view it as that. You're tying some kind of artificial currency or something of that matter to just the act of playing a game and getting that nice little hit of serotonin. You can look back on it and see how big number gets. Achievement placement within games is its own kind of like microfield where you say, okay, if the achievement pops up because you've beat this chapter, but it happens right in the middle of an emotional cutscene, is that detracting, or when can we put it in for the greatest effect? Like, if you've played Portal 2, you know the part when this is the part where he kills you, where Wheatley brings out the death trap, and it's the name of the chapter. GLaDOS is saying it. You get the achievement popping up in the corner. Wheatley then says, "This is the part where I kill you," and that's peak comedic effect there.
Yeah, there's a whole science, I feel, for achievements that I think is quite interesting to explore.
So you're going through college, you're exploring games as something to write about, and eventually you get into your freelance writing. What was the shift from that? You kind of said, hey, you can pitch these to gaming websites, but what was the introduction process of that?
At the time, Killscreen had a YouTube channel with Jamin Warren, I think. I hope my times aren't converging. But yeah, Killscreen had a festival. I think it was called 256. People in the gaming industry, like voice actors, I saw Jennifer Hale there. They would come and they would just talk about games, like a conference. I volunteered there for one of those events because it was in New York, and I'm from Jersey originally. That's how I got into it, because the editor-in-chief at the time was there, and so I went, "Hi, I'm Shonté. I want to write for Killscreen." And he was like, just email me what you do and all of that. I guess that was actually literally my step into it. Unfortunately, that was an unpaid internship. Those suck. I don't recommend those. I guess in a way it was helpful for me because it helped me get into that mindset of like, I had to play a game that someone told me to play. Like, if I had a game I wanted to write about, I could do that. But there was also, assignments and editors saying, hey, play this game even if you have zero interest in it, or interview this person even if you don't know who they are. And so I had to I learned how to be excited for something, or how to look at things critically, or, how to, I think I already had those skills, but I think I learned how to do them in a professional setting, which was new for me.
You're in with Killscreen. It's unpaid internship. Eventually, does that come to an end, and that's when you start also writing for Paste, for Vice, Kotaku?
Yeah. Eventually I stopped working at Killscreen because they just weren't offering me money. So I stopped. And in the meantime, I kept pitching. Yeah, so I pitched to, I think Motherboard was the next place for me after that, where I was consistently getting money or getting paid to write for them. And I remember I wrote an article about Nathan Drake from Uncharted, which is I actually love Uncharted. Yeah. Uncharted was one of when I was in that era where I went, I hate AAA games, they're all the same. I actually really liked Uncharted. But in my article, I wrote about his privilege of being basically a white guy, and how those games often portray foreigners as the villain. And so I wrote critically of the game. It did really well. It actually spawned a podcast episode. I don't know if it's up anymore, but a whole podcast episode where we were able to talk about it more. And I remember the editor at the time said that had gotten more engagement than usual, or something along the lines of the engagement was very high.
Metrics. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I went, woohoo, that's great. So yeah, that's a very fond memory I have of freelance journalism kind of working out for me. And I wouldn't say it never not worked out, but I feel like freelance journalism is just tough. It's a lot of pitching and no's, and then you get a yes, and then you get paid, but sometimes money doesn't come quite in time, or you have to ask a few times, or it's just not as much as you would have liked, or there's just there's a lot of pain to it as well.
For sure. So you're doing freelancing. Is the development on itch kind of running concurrently, or when does that come into play?
At some point, I realized I could make my own games, and even though they can't quite look like what I want them to look like, because at least when I started, I really only knew Twine, because that was what everyone was using for if you want to make games but you're more narratively focused, you don't know how to code, use Twine, make an interactive fiction. And so I did that. I think my first few games, and maybe you could argue they all are like this, but I feel like my first few games were very poetic and very heavily centered on poetry, because that was the field I was coming from. But yeah, I guess while I was freelancing, I was also starting to make games, and I started to put them on itch. It's weird because I never think about all the things I'm doing at once until someone stops me and says, you were doing all of this at once. And now I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, I guess I was, yeah.
Well, again, and I think whether it was earlier while we've been recording or in the pre-show, talking about, holy shit, Shonté, you do a lot. You've done a lot. You have, again, a master's, poetry. Do you want to talk about the poetry publications you've done?
Yeah, poetry is my love. It's hard. I feel like on both sides of my heart are games and poetry, but poetry is where I started. I was lucky enough to learn poetry, I think in elementary school was when I first started writing, my silly Dr. Seuss-esque, Shel Silverstein-esque poems. And yeah, I went to college for creative writing, specifically for poetry. And so I think pitching for poetry is what made me realize I could easily pitch for journals, for gaming journals, because it's like, oh, I get plenty of no's from poetry. I'm totally used to getting rejection. I can do it again with games. Publishing poetry was always my goal. And one day I would love to have a book out. That's a goal that I've been trying to get going for a while, but the pitching continues. One day someone will say yes. Poetry is a lot of contests. And so where with game journalism, it's like, hello, journal. I am, pitching this essay for you. I believe it'll be this many words and blah, blah, blah. With poetry, it's none of that. It's just submitting. It's just going, title of book, my bio, submit. Here's $20. I hope you say yes. And also you don't hear back for months or years sometimes. It depends on how fast or slow the journal is. But it's even though I'm used to submitting and I'm used to, putting myself out there in that way, it's still a different beast. And it always sucks because the rejections come at the worst times. Always. It's just like, you run out of gas. Oh, and you look at your email, you've been rejected.
Oh,
so
no.
It's just the worst. I don't know how they time it, but they always time it in the worst time.
Tell me about the shift that gets you into working with poorly timed games.
Yeah. So I was very lucky enough to find that job because of a friend who had a YouTube series. His name is Jay, and he had a YouTube series about No More Heroes. I forget how he found me or I found him, but at some point he asked me if I wanted to be on his series. And so I was like, yeah, of course. So in that series where we talked about No More Heroes, I think he and I realized we had a very good rapport. He also came from a poetic background. Mm-hmm. We kind of just shared stories about loving poems and loving games and thinking there's a way to mix them both. And eventually he worked at Poorly Timed Games at one point where I needed a job. I think this was when I graduated from graduate school. So this had to have been like 2020. I messaged Jay and I was just like, hey, I'm looking for a job. I would love it for it to be in games. If you know of anything, let me know. And luckily enough, he did know of something, and it was Poorly Timed Games. And so eventually I got the job and I started working as a writer for Poorly Timed Games, and Jay was the lead writer. That was such a pivotal time for me because it solidified the fact that I do love writing games. I made my own, but all of my games are very small. I make them by myself. It's a completely different beast when you have like an art team, a writing team, things like that. And so that job just solidified that love. It sort of reinvigorated me of like, yeah, I definitely want to do this. I would love to do this more if I can.
And you're working on Grim Tranquility specifically with Poorly Timed Games. But before even talking about that experience, can you give me a quick lowdown on what writing for games looks like? How is that different from what you've been doing, what you've been used to in the past between poems and publishing articles through various publications? What does writing entail maybe at large or specifically with your role at Poorly Timed Games?
I think it's very collaborative. I think writing needs to work with the gameplay, which needs to work with the art, which needs to work with the music, right? Everything is so hand in hand in hand. Everything is so tied and so connected. And so anything I write, I feel obviously it affects the characters, but like you also want to make sure that what the character is saying makes sense with the actions that they do. I think my favorite time at Poorly Timed Games was working with the sort of like weapons and combat designer, where he and I were kind of just playing around with sort of barks and little quips that the boss could say, and also playing around with names for their actions and names for their weapons and things like that. And so writing for games is a lot. It's as big as writing a cutscene with several characters, or it can be as small as writing an item and writing a little blurb for what that item does or where you find it. It's all encompassing. I guess those are the two big things when I think about game writing. One, it is, if you're working on a team, very collaborative because you're writing affects like all parts of the game. And two, it's a lot of writing. It's a lot of different writing. You can go from sort of writing these creative quips and barks or, cinematic dialogue to just, itty bitty, like, this is a sword, very technical things. So I think that's what makes it fun for me. It tickles a lot of different things. You're doing different things all at once. And so it's kind of hard to get bored, I guess, at least for me. It's not hard to get stressed. It's very easy to be stressed, but at least you're not bored.
So it does cover a pretty eclectic range. It's kind of safe to assume that if you are playing a game, if you're looking at a screen and you see any text on there, it was a writer in some aspect.
Potentially, yeah. Okay. I think, too, it kind of leads to a joke that a lot of people have, which is like, what is a narrative designer? And when you see a job posting for a narrative designer, is that what they actually want, or do they want a writer? And sometimes the narrative designer is a writer. So it depends on the position, it depends on the team, but sometimes the designer literally is just designing. Maybe they are just designing when a cutscene happens, or how you see a cutscene, or how you experience narrative in general. So for example, is it through notebooks? Or is it through, audio? Is it through scanning, like Metroid Prime? You have to design how exactly the player is actually going to interact with the story. And then the writer has to write the story. So it's a lot, but it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So Poorly Timed Games makes Grim Tranquility, and I was really excited to kind of learn more about Poorly Timed Games, looking at their Twitter page and seeing their bio. Something that caught me was they wrote that they were explicitly anti-crunch, and this studio is forming, 2019, 2018, somewhere around there. So you have these big exposés about crunch culture within the video game industry, and so it's really awesome to see this anti-crunch mentality, and every studio should be adopting that. Grim Tranquility comes out. What is kind of the next step for Poorly Timed Games?
So unfortunately, Grim Tranquility doesn't come out. Grim Tranquility's demo comes out, but nothing comes out after that. Unfortunately, just, I don't know. This is, I guess, how companies are sometimes. There's a butting of heads, and I was not high enough to truly, know all of what happened. But eventually the company sort of disappears, I guess. I don't know if disappears is the right word, but the only thing that comes out is the demo. And as far as I understand, there's no talks of anything else coming out. That was really disappointing for me, because I mean, for one, that would have been my first game with, my name in the credits, which is like a big thing in the gaming industry, having your name in the credits. I didn't realize until I got here how special that is, and two, how rare that can actually be. There are people who've worked in the gaming industry for years, and unfortunately just not have their names in the credits, either because the games don't come out, like Grim Tranquility, or the company does something very bad and doesn't put their name in the credits. It is unfortunate. I kind of rambled there. I'm sorry. I forgot.
Ramble away.
Forgot your question.
Well, no, and you're right. It is big. Having spent time in film, like I was even on stupid senior capstone projects that were 10 minutes long. It was even big there to see names in credits, because you imagine, that's going to be me on a bigger screen someday. I've seen so much recently about, between this studio is bought out by that studio, that person's made redundant, maybe this person worked on 75% of the game, and the person who took that role from them after an acquisition, they're not necessarily in the wrong here because they were just transferred around by a company, but sometimes you do see those instances where the person who did that 75% of the work isn't being credited for it. I don't know if there's an IMDb type equivalent for games work, but that's sometimes those inner rules for a place like IMDb. They need to verify that indeed your name is in the credits, and so that's perhaps something that you can't put on a potential resume.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the plights of games. Another plight too is looking at job postings that are like, must have worked on a shipped title. That's not me currently. Unless you count my own games, then yes, I have actually a lot of shipped titles. The two that I, was working on, Grim Tranquility and then the Blizzard game, neither of which have come to fruition. So I don't have any shipped games, if you look at it that way. And that definitely sucks because it feels like it diminishes all the work that I've done of, years of working on something and, thinking about it and writing and editing, and it can all be boiled down to, did the game ship or not? It didn't, so they don't care. That's, what it can feel like. And it's really discouraging because like I said, it's a lot of work that I did that I unfortunately can't show. I don't know what to do about it.
You brought up the two games, one of them Grim Tranquility, and the other is you're working on a game at Blizzard. And we can't go into crazy huge specifics about that game, but you're at Blizzard. What was the move from Grim Tranquility from Poorly Timed Games to Blizzard?
That was crazy, actually, because I got that job because of a game I made called Murder at the Cat Show. And just for like a little description of that game, it's a very small murder mystery inspired by Ace Attorney, because I love those games.
We were exchanging a tweet last night about Ace Attorney. Those games are great. Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but
no, it's fine. When you recommended it, I was like, you know what? I should replay those games for the 1000th time.
I need to. That Ace Apollo or Apollo Justice, Ace Attorney, that trilogy just came out, and I have been dying to revisit because I haven't touched Apollo Justice. I haven't touched that one since it originally came out on the DS. But Murder at the Cat Show is inspired by Ace Attorney. Please continue.
So you're just a detective trying to figure out who killed who. I got a message from a recruiter at the time at Blizzard because it was in a itch bundle. I think it was to support Ukraine. And so he got it, he played it, and he was like, this is great. We would love to talk to you about it. So I hopped on a call with the creative director at the time just to talk about how I made Murder at the Cat Show and what was my process. And I guess it was basically like a pre-job interview before the actual job interview. So yeah, long story short, I wound up getting the job because of a game I made, which is amazing. It's especially because I try not to diminish my work, but my little tiny game is like nothing compared to Blizzard as far as like scope and money and things like that. And I know my game is good, but again, it's like I looked at this of like, Blizzard cares about my tiny game, that they were even looking. Why were they looking at me? So I try not to be too hard on myself, but sometimes I'm like, wow, that's crazy that they even noticed.
Recruiter plays a game, you get invited for the interview, and you're at Blizzard. Are you immediately at work on, untitled, canceled survival game?
Yeah. Yeah, so they were looking for narrative designers for that game. They were kind of trying to build a new group of people to, I would interpret it as pushing for a more inclusive and diverse group of people at Blizzard. That's kind of the vibe I got, is that they were looking just for new voices. And so, yeah, I was hired specifically for canceled Survivor game. It was very interesting because, it was my first foray into the AAA space. And as previously noted, I was a AAA hater. So,
is that a conflict of interests or
there was a
internal
huge
struggle?
Yes, absolutely. And I tried so hard. That was actually my struggle for the entire time I worked at Blizzard. and also the fact that Blizzard had a lot of negative press because of how it treated its employees. And I can say that the team that I was on, I never had that problem. They really truly seemed like caring, creative, loving people. And so I'm fortunate to say that the group that I was in, I did not have that problem. But going into it, I knew Blizzard was known for that. I knew that Blizzard had a bit of infamy for their practices. And so not only did I have that thought in my head, I also had the thought of like, I'm an indie developer. I'm not a AAA developer. And that's kind of a burden I put on myself, and I recognize that because a developer is a developer, whether you're making a small game or a large game. It really doesn't matter. But my own identity made it really hard for me to enjoy working at Blizzard because the indie space is my home. It is my love. But at the same time, the indie space, with poorly timed games ended unfortunately. So it's kind of like I was damned if I do, damned if I don't. Like the space I love kind of hurt me and the space I hate likes me. It was very weird.
It's a hard spot to be in for sure.
Yeah.
So you're not seeing any crunch personally affecting you. Is that something you're perhaps seeing in the studio at other places? Because looking at kind of the timeline of Blizzard, that big first expose kind of broke in 2019-ish. Going back to end of 2022, people who worked on Diablo 4 are talking about crunch culture present. Was that something you didn't experience, but something you maybe witnessed?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting working at Blizzard, and I'm sure other huge studios are like this too. But something that I came to learn was that each game had its own culture. So I truly didn't know what, the Candy Crush people were doing or Diablo people were doing. Our own survival team had its own culture, and that culture was very much no crunch. If you're feeling tired, tell us immediately. Take your vacation, please. They were very much trying to avoid that. Anything that happened on other games, just it honestly felt like a completely different studio sometimes because we weren't out, or I should say I didn't communicate. I didn't talk to other people a lot that are in other games, I should say. So the other thing too I should note is that I was fully remote. Blizzard is in Irvine, California, and I was fortunate enough to put in writing that I was going to be permanently remote, which was very good because they eventually did try to do the thing where they force everyone back into the office.
RTO.
Yeah. So that was also another thing where it's like, I'm also kind of out in my own space over here while, who knows what's happening over there. So yes, I can say I was fortunate enough to be in a space where they seemed very adamant to not have crunch and to not have any sort of harassment or anything like that. Blizzard it's so big. It's just so big. I feel like even if you say no more crunch, it's not all going to trickle down to every group, unfortunately. I feel like if you just said stop crunching, if it came from high enough, I feel like maybe the other companies or whatever would actually listen, but I don't know.
Right. You don't know because this expose again comes out Blizzard in 2019 and they get huge flack for that, and it's not like crunch has never happened or been heard of in other places because you hear about it. It happened at Rockstar, but prior to that story breaking, because that was Red Dead 2 and that was 2018. But you still Naughty Dog Uncharted 2 has crunch happening, or not Uncharted 2, Last of Us 2. You got me thinking about Uncharted. It's all that's in here now, Uncharted. But yeah, Last of Us 2 had people complaining about crunch culture, and validly so. Crazy to think about what might have to happen. Who has to speak up to get crunch to stop being an issue with the industry?
Yeah, and it's not just AAA spaces too. I mean, I can't recall if Fulbright was called out for crunch, but I do remember they were called out for sort of poor practices. I know I've called myself a AAA hater, but I do want to recognize that the indie space is not perfect. It just really sucks that crunch can happen anywhere, and we really do need more people, especially CEOs or creative directors, managers. We just need more people to say, no, we're not going to crunch, and we're going to actively do things to make sure that does not happen and make sure people don't feel like they need to crunch. Because I know that happens too, especially when you're a new person in games and you're nervous and you want to do a good job. And so you go, oh, I can work a little later. I can work a little longer, because you're just trying to do a good job. But that's not going to help you in the long run. So I don't think you should do that. Even if you are, excited to work and you love your job, there should still be some borders and some boundaries there.
Yeah. Respect for, at that point, self-respect to allow yourself the time to exist. Conditions sound like they were good at Blizzard in your specific scenario, despite what working at Blizzard kind of the baggage that one might expect, which is awesome. I'm happy to hear that, especially going from Poorly Timed Games, a studio that was explicitly, vehemently anti-crunch. I didn't ask too, did that hold up? They were truthful about that?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I think so. I feel bad I can't confidently say yes, but there were definitely times towards the end where I felt like I need to get this done soon. And I do think I crunched a little there. I feel bad because I don't want to blame the company for that, but maybe I'm just trying to be too nice. I'm unsure.
Sorry to hear that. Also, again, grateful for you that your experience at Blizzard wasn't what seems to be a typical experience at Blizzard.
Yeah.
So you're at Blizzard for how long?
It would have been 2 years if I made it the whole way this year. Mm-hmm. So it was more like 1.5 years before they said, you're out of here. You and a bunch of other people.
1,900 people. Don't apologize. We can say a bunch because it was almost fucking 2,000 people.
Yeah. I feel bad for laughing, but I just want people to understand I laugh when I'm sad. It's how I cope. So I make jokes. I try to just be a little lighthearted, but it sucked. So I just want everyone to know that it sucked.
And this is inside baseball talk, I guess. This is episode 2 of Played Off, and episode 1, when I'm talking with Jared Mitchell, like we talked a bit about depreciative humor, self-deprecative humor, because sometimes that's what you have to do, especially in a stressful industry. He brought up a beautiful quote that unfortunately can't remember who said it, but self-deprecation is the language of the oppressed. And he said that stuck with him, and it's stuck with me since that interview, because it's something that is all too common in these stressful situations. So you almost kind of have to laugh to remind yourself to handle it with some amount of grace, not to kick yourself into the dirt over it. So
yeah,
I don't think that there needs to be an apology for kind of laughing to boost your own spirits about that, because sometimes that's all you can do is just laugh about it.
Yeah, no, that is very true. And it especially, I mean, this was my first layoff. Mm-hmm. And so it just felt very surreal. I think a few things happened which made it surreal. One, I think working remotely, being kind of alone in my own house and thinking like, oh, my job is over. Yeah, so I'm on the East Coast, Blizzard's on the West Coast. So I'm 3 hours ahead, and I guess I should, do you want me to like give you the day that I got laid off and like the feelings and things like that? Yeah,
go for it. Be as descriptive as you like.
Okay, because it's so funny to me in such a surreal way. So because I'm 3 hours ahead, I am used to being on Slack by myself for a couple of hours. I usually start my day at 10 Eastern EST, which is 7 their time. And so I don't usually get any sort of Slack messages until like 8 or 9 their time, so 11 or 12 my time. And I noticed I got a message from someone way earlier than I'm used to getting. And so I thought, that's weird. Why are they up at like 7 a.m.? And the message was very sad and very vague. It was very much like, I don't know what this means for us, but I just want you to know that I loved working with you all. Something like that. And I did not know what they meant.
That's the first message you saw.
That was the first message I saw. And I thought, why? What is going on? This sounds bad. And so I tried to look on Slack to see, like, were other people talking about this? What is going on? But I think it was still a little too early for everyone to, like, fully understand or fully, grasp what was going on. So naturally I go to my emails because I'm like, okay, if I can't see like a Slack message or Slack water cooler chat about this, then maybe there's some emails about it. The emails were very businessy, and I had a hard time parsing them because they didn't like explicitly say game is over, job is done, and so I think also I was starting to get a little stressed, a little like overwhelmed, and so I don't think I was reading the emails with much clarity. So the emails were not working for me. They were not helping me at all. I had no clue what was going on. Eventually, in the water cooler channel, someone posts the Verge article, which says that the game was canceled. And that's when I knew the game was canceled.
So that was the official moment for you, was not the emails, it was the Verge article.
Yeah, it was the Verge article.
Oh, man.
Because it said it clear as day that the game was no longer going to be worked on. And so with that, I went, okay, the game is done. That most likely means I'm going to get laid off, because I just assumed, one, not being at Blizzard very long, and two, I may be wrong about this, but I do feel like sometimes narrative designer jobs are not seen as important as like programmers, engineers, right? Because they are building the game. So that's just kind of, those were my two thoughts of like, I'm definitely going to get laid off because they don't need me, and I haven't been here that long. And then eventually I realized, oh, it's not just me that's going to get laid off. It's like all of us. It's like everyone. And not even, there were people who had worked there 10 years, 15 years, and they got laid off. And it was a very surreal moment because the news kept unfolding slowly, I guess. And also I feel bad because I just know some of my coworkers were literally just waking up. And they were just starting Slack. They were just going to their office. And so I had a few more hours, I guess, to kind of parse things, but they didn't. And it was all so fast. It was the day that we learned we were getting laid off was the day our computers stopped working. It was, it was immediate of like, we're not making this game anymore. You don't work anymore. So you can't use this computer anymore. I could not stop laughing because it felt so surreal. Mm-hmm. It felt so surreal. It felt like again, this was my first layoff. So maybe this is par for the course. Maybe this is what all layoffs look like, but I couldn't quite be sad yet. I'm slow to process things, I think. Laughter is just my trigger for like, bad thing is happening, let's find a way to make it lighter. And so that's my natural thing to do. But as the days progressed, sadness absolutely boiled up. And so that was the day that I learned I was laid off. It was the weirdest day. It was just so strange, and it was so sad too, because while Blizzard may not have been my dream place to work, it was my dream job. I absolutely loved what I was doing, and I loved my coworkers, and I think we could have made something really great. But a lot of people who got laid off, that was their dream job and their dream location. There were people that loved working at Blizzard and had worked there for so long, and I truly felt bad for them. I kind of mourned them, I think, because to suddenly lose a job that you hold so dear, it's hard. And I don't know, I think about that a lot. I think about the people who were truly in love with Blizzard. I don't know if that's the right word, but there are people who truly love Blizzard, and they were there, and their excitement to be there every day was always so apparent. They just wanted to make Blizzard better. They just wanted to change its culture. They just wanted to make a game that reflected them. Like, there were people there that genuinely wanted to make Blizzard a better place. And to see that they could just be let go so quickly is just so infuriating and so sad.
Yeah, some of the whiplash you can get from the whole scenario is how sudden these are happening. Sometimes you kind of get murmurings or rumblings that, from the top, oh, something might be coming soon. But for this to happen in the span of a day, that does create whiplash. That is incredibly fast. Throughout any of this in this day, were you getting communicated with by a person? Did anyone talk with you face to face, screen to screen, or was it, hey, Shonté, here's this email, by the way, goodbye?
Yeah, there was a 10-minute Zoom call where they kind of laid out what would happen, where they basically said, yeah, we're no longer making the game, and you all are laid off, and then they kind of just explained that if you have things in the office, we will mail them to you, and if you have one of our computers, you'll have to mail it back. Like, it was just sort of the logistics. But nowhere in that call was like, how are you doing? Or I'm sorry. There was no emotion. It was very much just business. It was just A, B, C, Zoom call over. It was, I think that was the strangest part for me. I don't know why I expected someone to say something kind to us, but I did expect something. I did expect like I'm so sorry to do this, or I don't know. I was expecting some sort of kindness. I don't know a better word for it. And what I got instead was just business. And I think that was the hardest part of like, oh, I guess we are just numbers. Right. And I guess we are just business sometimes.
You're certainly, unfortunately, not the only person who, again, even with the Activision, Blizzard, Microsoft, Xbox layoffs that you were a part of, that's at minimum 1,899 people who were also affected in that moment. But it's frustrating to say that there have been enough layoffs where you can sort of notice an evolution of the company speak because of situations like yours, where you can look at a social media post about layoffs happening from a studio and have a recognition of like, oh, that seems kind of nice how they worded that. No aspect of that should come across as nice, but it's only recently that you've started to see that language shifts, and I think it's because people are recognizing that this is a bit of an endemic issue, and in that moment they are just adding fuel to the fire. Prior to that, all of 2023, I imagine your situation is not the only one like it, and that's not any statement towards belittling what you felt, because that's valid and that's real, but 10,000 other people in 2023 maybe had this exact same experience. That should be infuriating, because you do want to have that human element. You want to know that, hey, this awful thing is happening and we're sorry that we have to do that, because that's your livelihood, and you are in a Zoom call with the people who are responsible for affecting that. You want to know that there's a human element, there's some kind of empathy in there. So your frustration, it makes sense, it's valid.
On one hand, I understand, because, these companies are companies. They are businesses. And so I guess on one hand, I can understand why there's not a lot of humanity or kindness when it comes to laying off people. But at the same time, like you said, we're people.
Conflicting thoughts. I feel like maybe it is part of the logical side of the brain, whether the left side, right brain, whatever, trying to tell you that they're businesses. It's okay. This is kind of what they have to do. And maybe it's just an attempt to kind of make sense of it, because it's a rough place to be in. I think a lot of people, that's really what they're missing, or what they're looking for, is that human element.
Yeah. And layoffs should not be a thing. I I always feel like I'm talking out of my ass because I really don't know how business works. I am not a business person, but I feel like layoffs shouldn't happen. I feel like, I don't know if this is true. I just feel like Blizzard has enough money that it shouldn't need to do that.
Not just Blizzard, but Microsoft, like one of the biggest tech companies in the world, you know? Maybe they have enough money so they don't have to lay people off.
When the merger happened, my manager at the time was like, how are you feeling about the Microsoft merger? Do you have any questions? And I remember telling him that I was a little concerned because mergers sometimes have layoffs. And I can't remember what month this was. It was in the fall of last year. Whenever the merger happened, this is when he asked me. I told him that about my fear of layoffs, and he said, I haven't heard anything. You're right that layoffs sometimes do happen at these points in time, but I have not heard that they want to do that. I have not heard anything. So my fears just kind of went away after a while because it really did seem like we may be in the clear. And then January hit, and then we were not in the clear. So it truly feels like you're just at the whim of, in my case, Microsoft, but just at the whim of whoever's on top, whoever's just like, keep them, lose them, fire them. It just kind of feels so callous. It's just, they just don't care. It's what it feels like.
As far as the day's proceedings go, what does the rest of the day after look like for you? Is it kind of settling in?
Yeah. That day, I don't know. I think I'm trying to think back to that day, but I feel like part of me purposely forgot it. Just because it was so weird. It was kind of like I lost my job, but the way that like severance and things like that go, I'm fine. Like I don't need to get a job immediately, but I also just lost this job that I considered to be very stable, because in the indie space you are most likely contract work or freelance, whereas in the AAA space you hopefully most likely have like a full-time job. The AAA space is usually seen as like the stable, comfortable job. That comfort job just went away like suddenly. It was a lot of I don't know what to do now. I don't know what to do next. A lot of friends that were like, I'm so sorry. A lot of people reached out, saying, oh, here's a job, there's a job. It was a whirlwind of just people trying to help, people trying to console, and me not really knowing anything, not really knowing what's going on, not really understanding my own feelings yet. Like I said before, I had a weird identity crisis working at Blizzard. And so on one hand, I could say, this is good. This is because I want to work in the indie space. Now I'm not working in the AAA space. Hooray. But on the other hand, I just got fired. I did not leave on my own terms. I did not leave on by my own design or my own time. So there was just a lot in my head, and I'm already an overthinker. So this was bad. This was dangerous. I realized as the days kind of progressed, I saw it as like a form of rejection in a way. I recognized that like I didn't get laid off because I was bad at my job. I completely recognized that I had nothing to do with it. This was just a business doing scummy business things. But it still hurt. It still felt like, darn, this thing that we were all excited about, it's just over. It's just done. It's just, I don't know why I couldn't tell you who thought it was a bad idea to do the game, but I guess someone thought it was a bad idea to do the game. And so, yeah, a lot of my days after were kind of like roaming my home. It's just kind of roaming around, which is why it's so messy still. I feel like it's kind of like trying to get my thoughts together, trying to get my life together kind of thing.
Sorry, I'm just kind of letting that sink in for myself. I can relate to just the pure shock, not having been in that specific situation of a layoff, of course, but that sounds a lot like shock. Especially like you said, maybe a little slow to process, but that is on its own a kind of form of shock. having had time to process what happened, what does life look like for Shonté now?
March has been a lot better. February, it got worse. So to give a little bit of context, so last year I got a divorce from my husband, my ex-husband. And so I was already dealing with that. Mm-hmm. So that's already a loss. Even though that divorce ultimately led to something good, it's still a loss. So I was dealing with that last year. And then this job, again, was a loss. And even though I think for me it may be good that I'm not at Blizzard, it's still a loss. The layoff happened like late January. So February, I think, is when my brain realized how much loss I was dealing with. February was a very depressing month. I think I'm usually a glass half full, optimistic, happy-go-lucky kind of person. But there's a point where even the happiest person kind of breaks. I think that broke me. I think getting laid off, having this thing that was comfortable, stable, the way that Blizzard was advertised to me was that, like, once you're in, you're in. Like, the only way you're ever fired from Blizzard is if you do something crazy bad. Like, it's super stable. You'll be there for years. It was very much advertised as like a home, a university. It was a place you stay if you want to stay. And then it was gone. And it just felt like, okay, well, what was all of that then? What was all of that talk about comfort and stability? And if you want to do this, you can do that. You just need to talk to this person. Everyone is so kind. Everyone will help you. Not to say that those things were wrong per se, but they were gone. They were just abruptly taken. February was just a month of me dwelling in that loss. I love to do a lot of stuff, but I've never really felt like I've quite hit what I would say is success. And so I think February for me became a month where I just kind of listed off the ways that I have failed, unfortunately. The poetry book that I want to come out one day is still not out. My dream job of, being a narrative designer for a company still has not happened. A relationship that makes me happy and is safe does not exist. It kind of became a month of that. I don't know how I got out of it. I don't actually know how I got out of it. I think part of it is me being a little bit too stubborn to allow myself to stay sad. Yeah, somehow I got out of it. I'm still kind of in it because my place is still a mess. I'm usually a way cleaner person.
There's no judgment. Again, behind me is...
So it unfortunately kind of snowballed. That layoff kind of snowballed into something bad. March has been a lot better because I think I've just been writing. I've actually been working on a game about depression that I hope will be out this month. But it's kind of it was a way I love writing poetry, but I felt like I couldn't write any poetry about my depression. I don't know why. I think sometimes my writing is like a valve in that some valves close and some open. And so depression couldn't be a poem. It had to be a game. I guess that's just how it worked for me. So yeah, I guess I just started to kind of process all of the loss that I was feeling and kind of recognize that, like, I am strong. I can actually handle this. It is okay. Tons of people get divorced. Tons of people get laid off, unfortunately. And so I am no different. And that kind of gave me comfort of, like, I'm not the first person to ever get laid off, Like, if other people can survive it, I can survive it. It'll be okay. Yeah, that's kind of the long story of why I was so sad.
No, and thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for the openness and the vulnerability. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm very happy to hear that, March has been going better for you. And I hope it continues to go better. Depression sucks. And it seems odd to say that there is a bit of beauty in it, because that beauty can only come from hindsight when maybe you look at things that people have made during those hard times.
Yeah.
My favorite podcast for a long while was called The Hilarious World of Depression, and it was, have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Okay. It is John Moe, who is I believe he did like radio broadcast stuff, and it's him sitting down and talking with comedians, like stand-ups, about their personal experiences with depression. It was a very stark and contrasting tone, because one minute you get people talking about, you know, these hilarious jokes, and then they would go into a super sad tale, and then they'd end it with like a punchline as if the whole thing had been a joke, but there's something real in there, you know. It's not like it's a joke. It's something that so many people experience, and having, you know, listening to that show helped normalize, at least for me, things like I was feeling or experiencing. All of that semi-unrelated tangent to say, again, thank you for sharing. I want to play that game. Whenever it comes out, I'm anticipating it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
It was very cathartic to make. A lot of like crying as I was making it, which is good. That meant I was actually hitting at something. It's really hard for me to be like indulgent, or I guess self-indulgent. It's hard for me to say, yeah, I was sad. I was in a sad place. I very much try to be as strong as I can be, which I think is also why I'm so slow to process things, because it takes me a while to allow myself to process things. All that to say, I hope the game helps someone else, or, you know, kind of lets someone think, oh, I've experienced this before, or I haven't experienced this, but this sounds bad. I don't know. I just hope it touches someone. So yeah.
Absolutely. What does your career kind of look like now? I mean, maybe that's something that isn't on your mind at all, and you're just kind of relaxing and still processing, but have there been attempts at, I'm maybe going to list off a bunch of stuff here and start where you feel comfortable, but have there been attempts at, you know, applications or interviews? Have you heard anywhere? Is games even something that you're still wanting to work in, or it sounds like this has been a lifelong passion for you, and so games are still something that you're working around, but do you see yourself going to a place like Blizzard again, or a place like poorly timed games?
I have been looking at jobs, but they have not been games. I, for the longest time, I thought I had to work in games, and now I'm starting to think I don't. Because I love making games. I love making my own games, and I've realized I have entered the gaming space by doing that, period. I keep thinking, you know, I need some sort of validity because I need my name in the credits, or I need to work at somewhere, you know, that everyone knows, or something like that. But you really don't. The gaming space is a huge space. It's an art. So, you know, you can be as independent as you want, or you can be this huge conglomerate if you want. I guess that's the beauty of art. So yeah, I've been looking for jobs that are not in games, because I'm just tired. I'm tired of the gaming industry. I feel like, I hate to sound negative, but I do feel like it burned me in game journalism, and it's kind of burning me in narrative design. But when it doesn't burn me when I make my own games. And so who knows? Maybe in the future I'll think about working in the gaming space, like, I guess, professionally again. I don't know. Making my own games is professional. I'm a bit unsure. Yeah. So like I'm already there. But if you're asking me if I'll like work at Blizzard or a Blizzard type place again, I don't think so. Right now I'm going to say no. Never say never, but right now, no. I'm not in. Something that has always touched me is when I was in college. This was in 2014, when like jobs were not really abundant, and people were basically going straight from college back to their parents' house, and that wasn't seen as the norm, because, you know, you're supposed to go to college and then get a job and then, you know, buy a house and then get a pet and then die. Like that was kind of the strat. But in 2014, it looked like that strat wasn't working anymore. And so I remember my academic advisor at the time, she had a meeting with like all of the English majors, and she just kind of laid it out. She was just like, there's not a lot of jobs. So that meeting was more so about like how to advertise ourselves for jobs that we may not be passionate about. Like, you may not find an editorial job, but how about this technical writing job? And this is how you can get that job. But one of the things that she said that I loved and I still think about today is that the job you want may not exist and you may need to make it. And I've always felt that way about myself. I think the job I want doesn't exist. And I think I just need to make my own games. I think I need to, I don't know if that means to become like my own studio where I lead, 5 people or 20 people. I don't know what that looks like, but I think the things that I want to do just require me to make it rather than, apply for some other place. So that's kind of the mentality I'm going for. I need a job because that's how our world works. When it comes to art and passion, I'm just going to make my own games because they make me happy, and I can collaborate with, I've already, made games with friends before, and that's really great. Or I can hire someone to help, assuming I have the funds for it. But that to me excites me way more than applying to some other place.
Mm-hmm. You've been not involved, you've written poetry, you write poetry. Poetry is a form of self-expression, and making your own games is also a form of self-expression, especially when you're not to say that people can't make meaningful experiences that are personal to them working in larger spaces, but it's certainly a hell of a lot easier to do at that smaller scale, especially when it's you making your own game. You can be as expressive as you want. There's a perfect kind of marriage or blend of those two aspects together. They complement each other really nicely. And so I had mentioned that I had played Bottom of the Well before hopping on this call, was a game that you did, and we talked, that is poetry. It was poetry inspired, and that comes across in the game itself. And so I think there is something really beautiful about that. And we talked, I can't remember if it was prior to recording or during recording, about Venba and the opportunities for storytelling. What you're talking about there, I really love that because it's art. It's art.
I recognize I am just an artist. Like games are a business, and I am not a business person. I'm an artist. So I don't know what that means because all of my games are kind of, the poetic, experimental, weird games that sometimes you have to fight for people to pay for because they're like, I don't want to pay for an itch game because they're all crap, like people who think like that. But those are my favorite games. The sort of like the weird, the like rough around the edges. I don't know. I'd pay $60 for one of those games. I just think they're so great.
That's something I always think about is probably the worst thing you can be is boring. I don't care if a game is necessarily good or bad, so long as it's not boring. You can find great things even in the bad games as long as it's something interesting. I think it was like Kyle Bossman that said that even like a 0 out of 10 has its value, has its merit. And again, I got off topic because I'm talking about like good games, bad games, but interesting games are the important thing. Games that make you smile and go, huh,
Yeah, absolutely. I feel bad for kind of advertising myself, but
hey, don't. No. Advertise away. Plug whatever you like.
Okay. Well, every August for the past few years, I've been doing a game a day challenge where I play and complete a game every day for the month of August. I rely solely on itch for that because those are usually where the shorter games are. And every month, I would say July, I get nervous because I'm like, oh God, am I going to do it again? What if I miss a day? Whatever. And then August comes around and I love it. It's just like a celebration of people who are making little games, little demos of just like, I'm just trying this thing out, or I want to express this emotion I was feeling, or this was for a game jam, it's not done. that always inspires me. I think that's what keeps me going in games, in the gaming industry. Just seeing the people who try things out and make those little games. And then when you see the comments of people saying like, oh my God, I cried playing this, or like, this was so fun, I hope you make more of this, like that collaboration, I guess, or just the response, like it just makes me so happy, and it makes me excited for every August when I get to do it again. I have never played a game that was bad or boring, I should say. I've never played a boring game. It's, even if it was 1 minute long, it was still very interesting. So just to your point about good or bad or boring, I just feel like there's just so many wild ideas out there. I just want to see them all.
Yeah.
I just want to play them all.
That's awesome. This is in August. It's a game a day challenge where you're playing one. Okay. Yes. I thought you were saying like making one, and I was like, oh my God, Shonté, when do you sleep?
No.
That rocks. I'm gonna try and do that. Is that an official thing, like something like Poketober, which is like Pokemon October, where it's just do a drawing of a Pokemon a day? It's what you're doing in August here, like a official thing, or is this just a challenge that you've set for yourself?
It's just a challenge that I set up for myself. As far as I understand, I looked it up. I don't think anyone else has used game a day like I have. Actually, it was inspired by poetry, because the poet Nicole Seeley had a challenge where she's a professor, a poet, and she realized that she didn't have a lot of time for poetry. Even though she was a professor, she felt like she didn't have the time to like leisurely read poetry like she used to. So she made a challenge to read poetry every day. I had felt that way about games as well, of like, even though I love games and I want to make games, I felt like I wasn't really sitting down to enjoy them anymore. And so I just kind of took her challenge and made it games. And then that's how Game a Day was born.
That is awesome, and I love that idea. And you do it in August. I think I might try and join you alongside that, because that does sound like a good time, and being able to experience like unique and interesting things is something that inspires me. Yeah, I might join you with that. We'll touch base in July, but
yeah, that'd be super fun, because like one day you're playing a visual novel, the next you're playing a roguelike, and then a deck builder, and it's just a puzzle. It's just it's just so fun. It's just what makes games. It's I could talk about it forever.
Yeah. I think we have a pivot here now to focusing back on the layoffs, so maybe it's getting a little bit dour again, but in your opinion, these layoffs are happening and neither of us are economists or anything of the sort. In your opinion, why are so many people being laid off? Is it pointing to problem within the industry writ large? Is it mismanagement? Is there any number of contributing factors? Is it studio to studio? Or
that's a great question. Because it really does just feel like one day a giant company says no more, and then that's it. My assumption is the fear of things being profitable or not profitable. I think it's really just down to that. I think it's just, do these people think this is profitable? No, then get rid of it. I truly feel like that's it. Because if I think about my time at Blizzard, I feel like we were managed well. I feel like we put our all into it. I think we were genuinely trying. I think we were producing good work. I really don't think there were any other reasons besides just someone said this isn't profitable. That's the only guess I have.
Do you think there are any efforts that employees can take to protect themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think unionizing is always good.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, definitely unions. I'm trying to think if there's any other like tips or tricks to avoid layoffs. And I don't know. I truly don't know.
Unions are like instrumental in trying to help combat this. They're not always a 100% efficient stopgap. Like I know Sega of America had broken news for being like one of the first, especially Western studios, to be of the size that they are and to unionize, and that's awesome. They also had layoffs within the past couple months, and it was only 60. I shouldn't say it was only 60 people. It was 60 people, but compared to the scope of, Blizzard, 1,900 people. That could have been Sega, and you want to hope that the unionization efforts that they had taken reduced it from a potentially higher number. Maybe it was 600 instead of 60. All of that to say that unions are especially important. It's been incredibly inspiring to see, the IGN union, the IGN Creators Guild, I believe is the official title there, happen to protect writers in that space. The Sega of America union. There are more popping up, and they're at a more frequent pace, which is inspiring to see.
Yeah, I do think people are actively working to create change. It's just, unfortunately, it's going to be slow. And we will eventually see the efforts. And I'd say we're seeing them still. Like, we are seeing moments where the union worked and like people working towards that stuff, create good results. It's just not like worldwide yet.
Right.
So eventually, hopefully, that will change.
Shonté, I want to say thank you for, again, being on here, being so willing to be open and, share your experience, because that's vulnerable. So thank you for being able to share that. Is there anything that you'd like to plug? And in the nature of the show, this is pretty broad. Is there a means that people can support you either in your career or financially as you've been affected with these layoffs? Is there a project you worked on that you want to point people towards? Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you ever want to play my games, just go to my itch page, which is my name, shonté.itch.io. All of my games are free except for Murder at the Cat Show. So if you want to give me $5, you can do that by playing Murder at the Cat Show. But something that I love the most is just hearing how people feel about my games. So if you cannot, support monetarily, totally okay. Play one of my free games and leave a comment and tell me what you liked or didn't like, because I like that too. and I would love that. We talked about Game a Day. If you ever want to see what games I'm playing, this is only in August, but if you're ever interested in the games I played in the past, that's on my website. So Shonté-Daniels.com.
And I'll put a link to that in the description of this too.
Oh, great.
Alongside anything you've mentioned as up till this point and after this point.
I think those are really the two things. My website and my itch page really hold all of my stuff. If you ever want to find my poetry, it's also on my website. So yeah, just like leave a comment and tell me what you like about my game, and that'll boost my spirits. I don't need money. I do need money, but I don't need money if you just boost my spirits.
I want to plug, I talked with you about things I'd seen you'd written or the game I'd played that I mentioned earlier. I want to plug, I really enjoyed Bottom of the Well. I think it was this tiny little, like we've talked about, poetic experience that was incredible. And then the piece about The Walking Dead that you wrote for Paste Magazine, I'm going to plug that because I particularly enjoyed it. Maybe someone will say, why is he recommending this? But I think it's topical, it's relevant. You're writing about the telltale layoffs in that piece was published 2018, 2019. And so there is an air of relevancy for it. So I'm going to point people to that, but absolutely. Play Shonté's games. Check them out.
And they're short. So like, you don't even need to think like, I'm investing in a whole hour in my game. No, it's more like 5 minutes.
I do want to take the opportunity just at the end of the episode to plug the Games Industry Job Hunt Slack channel that I've seen floating around. I'll include a link to that, but it's a community focused on providing job hunting resources to those impacted by a layoff or reduction in workforce within the games industry. I don't have direct affiliation with them, but it feels like one of the proper things to plug and point people towards at the end of this. I also want to point out something new that I saw is Amir Satvat's website, where he is posting resources of all kinds of different helpful things, hiring visibility, coachings, role listings, support postings. There's a bunch of stuff on there, and it looks pretty well organized, as well as including a LinkedIn community. So I want to point people towards that. The little bit at the end here, if you want to support this show, don't. Support Shonté. I would feel like the worst human in the world if I made a single dime, a single cent off of this. It's about the people who are being affected here. So if there's any way that you want to show support Shonté here, support any of the other people that we are interviewing as part of that. With all of that said, Shonté, any closing thoughts, any words of wisdom to depart on?
I think the thing that keeps me going is the fact that I keep dreaming and I keep hoping and I keep wishing that we'll see the industry change. It's really funny when you hear sort of that romantic stuff that's like, oh, keep dreaming, keep wishing. It doesn't hit you until it hits you, Like, I feel like things like that don't really grab you until you need them. When I was kind of in my depressive state that I'm still kind of getting out of, one of the things that got me out was just like dreaming, and the fact that no matter how sad I got, I still thought of video game ideas. Something about it kept me pushing. So I think if you are someone who wants to get in games or has been in games but have gotten laid off, or you see your friends get laid off, I know it sounds really gushy, but you got to keep dreaming. You got to keep hoping for a better future, because that's how you get it, because that's how you start acting on it. And at least that's how I work. But I'm also just like a mushy poet, so maybe don't listen to me.
No, I mean, I think there's absolutely truth in what you've said there. But hell yeah. Anything else, or?
No.
All right.
I should stop.
No. Well, this has been Played Off. I've been Perry Gottschalk. This has been Shonté Daniels. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.